Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Policy Development Committee meeting of Tuesday, May 7th, 2024. Noting everybody is here, Councilor Oakley is online. Approval of agenda. Any additions? I only have one item that we need to deal with after the delegation 4.1 to move up the report 8.1 to right after that. If there's no objection to the committee, asking for a motion to approve that. Moved by Councilor Pierce, second by Councilor Bell. All those in favor? Carried. Anybody got a pecuniary interest to declare at the appropriate time? Delegations. 4.1. Ian Duff, McSweeney and Associates, and Zach Gable. Welcome.
Yes, through the chair. First off, thanks for this opportunity to present the new economic development strategy. But I'd like to start by introducing Ian Duff. Ian is the president of McSweeney and Associates and brings over 30 years of hand-on experience in community economic development. Ian is passionate about helping communities achieve new successes and is always looking for ways for communities to find new ways to drive positive change. So I'll hand things over to Ian to start the presentation.
Thanks, Zach. Can everyone hear me okay? Just a nod ahead. I can't see everyone perfectly, but I'll give it a go. I think before I start, two things. Zach, I need to get you a new bio. That 30 years makes me feel really old. But the other part is, before we get into the actual presentation, I do want to tip my hat and commend Zach and his team. We've been developing strategies for communities across Canada for close to 25 years. And for us, success is really about when our clients, so communities such as yourselves, really take a hold of the process and really take a hold and get involved in developing the strategy. And Zach and his team did that. So we helped them through a process. But through the entire process, they challenged us, they pushed us, and at the end, they really took a hold of the strategy, and their fingerprints are all over this. So I do want to commend Zach and his team for going through that. So I see up on the screen we have the presentation. Zach, are you going to drive it from your end, or do you want me to drive it on my end?
I can advance the slides again.
Okay, perfect. So do you mind moving us forward? Thanks. So before we start talking about the specifics within the brand strategy, a lot of people ask, why strategy? What's important? Why don't we just go and do things? A strategy is very important, specifically around economic development, because economic development can become very unfocused very quickly. So you want to look at preparing a strategy. It really helps you to continue building on the good things that you're doing. It outlines and builds off of the great actions that you have in your previous strategy. It also really continues to look forward into the future and to help determine what are those things, what's the baseline, what are the things we really need to focus on to make Brant a much better community going forward. And at the end of the day, what it really does is provide direction and guidance so that your focus can stay true. Your economic development team can continue, working on great things, but can really nail down those activities and those actions that are important over the next 4 years. Next slide, please, Zach. So to develop the strategy, we were brought in to really help with a process. And the way that we've laid out the process was really through 4 very specific steps. And I'll go through the steps in a minute, but really we call them discover, define, develop, and deliver. And it really starts at a general high level around discover, and then it gets down to a very detailed plan when you get to deliver. Next slide, please, Zach. So the first step around discover, it's really understanding what Brant looks like on paper. It's really doing that deep dive to understand, what's important, what are the things, the strategies, the actions, what are the directions that Brant is currently going in? And, what are some of the things that really jump out in terms of priorities from a documented perspective? So strategies, other reports that have been approved by council, that kind of stuff. We want to make sure we don't lose things that have been done in the past. And then we also looked at your industries from a very specific standpoint and put together an analysis on your target industry sectors. Next slide, please, Zach. The next step is really understanding what's important to the community. And for this project specifically, it was a very targeted consultation. So we did one-on-one consultations, we did one-on-one interviews. We had an online survey that we sent out, and then we had a working session. And the working sessions were really bring everyone together and start strategic planning. And I'll talk about that in the next step. So sorry, Zach, next slide. Thanks. So step 3 is really about developing the plan. And where this starts is at what we call a working session, where we bring a group of people together, we sit them down, and we really talk about the things we've uncovered to date. We have a really thorough conversation about what's important to the community, what's important from an economic development standpoint, and we flesh out some ideas and flesh out some thoughts about how to move forward. So specifically at that working session was 4 topics that we really focused on. It was around becoming a more diversified economy. It's about how to drive investment into the county. We talked about tourism, and then we also talked about the downtown core within Brant. And out of that discussion, then we started developing the actions. So literally at that day, it was a community-driven session where they helped us draft some of the actions that found its way into the final strategy. Next slide, please, Zach. And Zach, this is where I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Ian, and through the chair. So we collaborated with Ian and his team, and we really wanted the strategy guided by these higher concepts, these guiding principles and aspirations to anchor it. So we came up with 8, and they are, we want our downtowns and cores to be, energetic and financially feasible. We want our infrastructure to be investment ready. We want to engage in proactive collaboration. We want to highlight our unique identity and cultural expression. We want to champion diversity, equity, and inclusion. We want to help foster sustainable climate action. We want to help develop a dynamic and adaptable workforce. And we want to drive innovation and growth in the county of Brant. So what does that start to look like when you think of it as a strategy? Well, it evolved into 4 overarching themes, 16 goals within those themes, and 47 action items. Now, my intent here is not to read every action item and go through each one, but I do want to go through the themes, the goals, and then highlight a few of the actions on the way. So, theme 1 is be business friendly and investment ready. So there are 5 goals associated with this. Goal 1, we want to establish policies and programs to direct the highest use of the county's employment areas. So 2 specific actions here. 1, we really want to reimagine Kanesville as a center of excellence for advanced manufacturing. We think we have all the right components here when it comes to access to rail, hydro, natural gas, and now with the Kanesville EA being completed, water and wastewater. So we'll be working with development services to implement a number of policies to set it up for this type of investment, but as well making sure that the province knows about the site and market it appropriately to drive home that investment. The second aspect of this goal, the county is in a very advantageous position with many different employment areas. We really want to understand the value proposition of each of those employment areas and then start to get the message out. Some of the other goals we have is enhance collaboration with relevant internal departments to improve the County of Brant's experience for ICI. So, I think something we can always improve on. We want to work with the business community to build our connections and have better communication. Goal 4 is influence the need for public transportation to support the business community, just to understand, what could commuter service mean to improve business in the County of Brant. And goal 5 here is establish the best and most effective service delivery model for entrepreneurs and small business support services in the County of Brant. Understanding there's an existing network of entities like Enterprise Brant or the Brantford Brant Business Resource Center, so making sure people know how to navigate that. Theme 2 is capitalize and build on the existing tourism, arts, and culture assets of the County of Brant. So goal 1 here would be us undertaking a tourism strategy. And when I say tourism strategy, the goal isn't necessarily to bring more people into Brant, but it's to find that right balance where residents can buy into the plan, and we're also undertaking some destination sustainability actions as well. So we want to continue to enhance capacity locally with our partnerships and our local businesses. Goal 3, we want to improve infrastructure needed to support tourism. A specific example of this would be around niche accommodations, and can we encourage things like farm stays and glamping and those real unique things in our community. Goal 4 is develop the agritourism market to support rural economic development. And Goal 5 and Goal 6 both have their own strategies that Council has previously approved. So Goal 5 would be essentially to implement the arts, culture, and heritage strategy, and Goal 6 would be implement that filming and digital media strategy. Theme 3 is future-proof the downtowns to create vibrant, mixed-use community cores. Goal 1, the actions are about creating vibrant downtown cores. So this is ideas around shop local campaigns, street activations, smart city infrastructure. And Goal 2 really looks to the future, as we evolve and, what do we do to future-proof those downtown areas? And this could include things like CIPs and, ensure we're implementing mitigation plans during big projects. And finally, Theme 4 is to develop a diversified business community to ensure a resilient and sustainable economy. Goal 1 is support the County of Brant's agriculture sector. We have 3 actions under this, which include implementation of an agriculture-focused CIP, continuing to promote the on-farm diversified use program with development services, and we also want to work with the appropriate partners to help continue the adoption of precision agriculture in the county, and we've had some really good success working with Conestoga College on this. Goal 2 is help businesses prepare for the future by promoting sustainable economic development. And this is where we look to align ourselves with Council's climate emergency declaration. We want to get the word out as part of this and really drive education to our communities. And this could look like workshops, partnering with the right groups, and BME might be a good example of this. But also figuring out, okay, are there barriers to entry for some of these entities from doing business in the County of Brant? And are there ways we can kind of further encourage it? And one of those actions is to research a CIP that could support net zero building or other carbon reduction strategies, or potentially a brownfield remediation program. And finally, Goal 3 is create a safe, inclusive, and accessible business community. 3 actions out of this one. It's, we have a forthcoming diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy in the department. So we want to help implement that as it applies to the business community. We want to work with different agencies to help newcomers get integrated into the labor force. And finally, we really want to work closely with our community partnerships division to help businesses get accessible. So that's kind of your overview of the strategy. Ian and I are happy to take any questions.
Questions? Councilor House.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you, Zach and Ian. Within the world of economic development, we're always learning, and there will always be, as we continue to work on these, the themes and the goals, we're going to learn. I'm thinking within Theme 2, Goal 6, the filming and digital media sector, as we continue to have filming projects within our communities, I think we learn things that may influence us to want to tweak some of the the execution of these strategies. What's the mechanism moving forward for that kind of adjustment?
Through the chair to you, Councillor House, we do want to be able to come back to council and report on progress of the strategy. And, we do have to be prepared and flexible. When we look back to the lifespan of the last economic development strategy, no one could have anticipated a global disruption as we did through COVID. So I think, we want to be able to chart our path, but make sure we do have some flexibility in that. And when it makes sense, come back and look for direction and just keep that communication up. And I'll also defer to Ian if he has any additional thoughts on this.
Through you, Mr. Chair. No, Zach, I think you nailed it. Realistically, plans are important, strategies are important, but flexibility is also important. So, Councillor, your question is a very good question. The actions provide the guidance that you need, but if you need to change them as you go through and things change, as Zach mentioned, then you change them. And Zach is prepared. Sorry, Zach, for putting you on the spot, but from our conversations, to come back and report on success and report on what's going on, and that's just part of the process.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Zach and Ian. Thank you for the report. It took me a long time to read it, I have to say. I couldn't read it just once. I had to read it a couple of times to really pick it up. A couple of things that struck me in terms of background. On your snapshot page, you'll see that the population of Brant has grown as much in the last 2 years as it did in the previous 5 years before that, as it did in the previous 10 years before that. So there's a real acceleration of growth. And a lot of that is people moving in from outside. But then I read later on in your report, a lot of those people then move outside again to go back to work. So when I think last time we had our economic development strategy, we talked about targeting, bringing jobs into the community where people could live and work. And I don't see that as coming through here in the same way that it did last time. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, through the chair to you, Councillor Bell. I think in the past, that type of statistic was easier to interpret. Now we're kind of adjusting to this, work from home, flexible employment kind of scenario. So it does make it a little harder to figure out that piece of it. But I will say, a big piece of this is, figuring out what can we do to drive better job density in our industrial areas and hopefully improve that ratio. And I also think, maybe a missing piece of this is transportation. So maybe not highlighted or isn't bolded as much, but I think it is certainly part of the strategy. And Ian, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that as well.
For you, Mr. Chair, honestly, Zach, that's another good answer, so I'm not quite sure if there's much I can add. I think the difficulty with labor force and what happened through the pandemic, we're not quite settled yet. So as Zach mentioned, things fluctuate, things move around. Labor force is typically regional. So if you can try to drive growth within your commercial industrial sector, it will help to keep some jobs local. But the part that we're understanding now, specifically with labor, is that labor moves. So just because you drive job density into your commercial industrial areas doesn't guarantee that those jobs are going to be filled by people that live in Brant. You can hope for it, and it makes more sense for them to do that. But labor is definitely mobile. And that's just a nature of how people live. So,
thank you. If I may, Mr. Chair, Zach, the background report I thought was really interesting. What do you think are the big takeaways from that report, and what actions do they prompt that we're not already taking?
Yeah, I think, through the chair to you, Councillor Bell, I think it really does drive home, that we're a growing community and sectors such as manufacturing, the numbers are improving. So to me, it was, it's a really good news story that's happening about kind of the growth we've seen across sectors. So it kind of starts to spin into what is the management side of this? How are we making sure we're getting all we can get out of our industrial areas? How are we, approaching tourism where it's not about just driving more tourists, but kind of getting the higher spend? So to me, it kind of prompts this, how do we utilize our resources most effectively? And again, I'll look to Ian for any additional thoughts.
No, thank you, Mr. Chair. Zach, you nailed that one. That's good. I'm okay with that. Thanks.
Sounds like Zach has all the answers here, which is good. So I'll give him another question. Typically with a strategy, at least in my experience working in industry, there was always some objective you were trying to achieve. How would you describe the objective of our economic development strategy? What objective function are we trying to optimize?
To the chair. I don't know. Ian, do you want to start this one off?
Sure. I don't think there's actually one, sorry, through you, Mr. Chair. I don't think there's actually one specific objective. I think if we had to sum it up, Brant is doing a lot of really good things, and a lot of good things are happening in Brant. And the underlying theme or the underlying objective of the strategy is to continue moving forward. Continue, focusing on those areas that you can make the biggest impact for positive community change, but also focusing on those areas that need some help. So in terms of the underlying theme from where we sit on the consultant side, it's continue moving forward. It's not a rebuild, it's not a redo. It's really just a refocus and continue moving on. That's what we're taking away from it, from our end.
Okay, just one final question from me. I think it was the last council meeting we were talking about development charges, and I think Councillor Chambers talked about industrial assessment. I had anticipated that somewhere in here you would have talked about our desire to grow that industrial assessment and how this strategy would help that happen. Comments?
Yeah, to the chair, to you, Councillor Bell. I think, we're in this position now where there's a huge opportunity ahead of us. We've had either, there's approval process or something that's kind of holding us up right now, whether it's, getting the EA finalized in Kanesville, which is really going to drive investment. What's going on at Rest Acres in the 403. Once we're kind of through that, approval process, the employment lands and non-commercial assessment that's going to come online is going to be significant. And I think the hope is during the lifespan of this strategy, we kind of get out of this holding pattern and get to a place where we're more aggressive about marketing the county as a place to invest.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Chambers?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to make a couple of comments, and then I'd like you to comment on my comments. And it's similar to what Councillor Bell just said. I look at your report and I can divide it in my own mind as community development and economic development. Community development makes the community a good place for people to come to, but that costs money. Economic development attracts industry and commercial assessment, which makes money. With our tax rate being almost 9%, I look at the priority to make money before we spend money. So if we focus on community development at the expense of economic development, we've got it backwards, in my opinion. And looking at your report, I see a lot of community development but I see very little economic development. And I'll conclude, and then I'll let you comment on my comments by saying that if you can attract one industry like Adidas or a battery plant or something that brings in a lot of assessment, and you focus on that and you make that happen, then with that assessment, you've got a whole whack of money to make your community better. But if you're expecting to make the community better to get these industries, then you're spending a lot of money before you have money. Those are my comments. Can you relate that to your report?
Through the chair, thank you, Councilor Chambers. Ian, I don't know if you'd want to start us off here, or I certainly can. Or...
Well, actually, the timing of this comment is quite interesting. I think it's perfect. Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for that, Councillor. You're very astute in your observations. There's a huge shift right now in economic development, and community development is becoming more and more prevalent within economic development to drive your industrial attraction, your industrial investment, and it's all around people. There's an issue with attracting and retaining people to most industry sectors these days. Canada has a labor force issue that we're grappling with. And those communities have been successful are those communities where people want to live. And so your comments about having to spend versus trying to attract, you're bang on. But the reality is, if you want to attract investment, you have to find a way to attract people. And right now, that's why you see so much community development and the need to invest in the community versus just investing in land and servicing. But your comments are very your comments are very astute in the sense that that's the transition that's happening right now.
Allison would like to say something.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I hope you don't mind that I jump in here, but I'm just going to say, in terms of economic development, attracting industries that are lower density employment. So if we were to look at a sort of warehousing logistics, is much easier in terms of you basically just need land. You just need the land available. It becomes more complex the higher density and the higher use you get. So as we get towards a sort of dense office type environment, I'll say the more things those users need around them, the more amenities, housing, transit, transportation, that sort of thing, schools. So I think we're at a point where we want to see higher density. We want to see not necessarily all office users, but we want to see more manufacturing, that sort of thing. And where I think we've been running into difficulties in more recent years is not having not only the amenities, but also the density of infrastructure, and I'll say higher power use, higher gas usage, transit, potentially rail. We've had problems with all of those types of things, and we've talked to the province about it, and we've certainly made a lot of investment here at the county in terms of that infrastructure. But I understand your point. It's a bit of a chicken and egg thing. Where do you go? And we found in order to get that higher density, we really need to sort of wrap some of those amenities around it and be able to attract the workforce, as Ian said, and also have the infrastructure in place that's going to attract the higher density users beyond the land, which is something, in the past where we've been able to just focus on having the land available. Now we're having layers that we're sort of trying to get on top of that in order to increase the density in some of that land and get that sort of higher invest use and maybe get a better match to some of the population growth as well.
Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Zach. Zach, I noticed that the number one item on actions for advancing Brant's economic future is be business friendly, investment ready. I don't know if you scored these according to priority, but it, when I read that, be business friendly and investment ready, I think before I got on council, and I think a lot of people would assume it's getting companies to relocate here. And yours and Allison's predecessors in the economic development department, I remember them heading down to Toronto for trade shows. The county would run ads in international papers, but since I've been around this horse show, I've noticed that a lot of the growth comes from businesses that are already here. You know, you look at the big guys like Walter Steel, Stubby's, Tiger Cat. They're all expanding. They're growing, right? Even the smaller guys, Wilson Machining, Roswell Concrete, they're growing as well. So through this strategy, what will we be doing different in a year's time or 2 years' time versus today to support the industries and the businesses that are already here? Or do you think we support them so well we don't need that?
Through the chair to you, Councillor Miller, one of the key actions within this strategy is relaunching what's referred to as a business visitation program. And this is something we've started doing right now. And I might defer to Ian later because you're right. You know, so much growth does come from existing businesses, but it's really about building up that relationship with all them, you know, the businesses in your community and figuring out, okay, what are the roadblocks to expansion, or you know, what can we do to facilitate that? So that's something that's in the strategy, and you know, what does get identified quite a bit is you know, labor force issues and how do you address that, and then it starts to become a conversation about transportation. But yeah, it certainly is a focus for us, is just, you know, building up that business relationship and being there to help support businesses, whether it's helping them with a process, making those introductions to senior levels of government, or identifying different programs. And then Ian, I don't know if you have any additional thoughts.
I do, Zach, and through you, Mr. Chair. Investment attraction really starts from within. I know a lot of people, the first thing they think of with investment attraction is all about bringing in that large employer or that large investor. The Site Selector Guild, just at their conference last week, acknowledged 80 to 85% of all investment into a community comes from existing businesses. That's actually growing. That used to be down by around 75%. So getting to know your local business community, supporting them, finding out what they need to be successful is huge. And that's why, as Zach mentioned, there is a focus and there's priorities within the strategy to focus on local businesses, because they are the driver of the economy, and they will be the driver of your investments into the future.
Councillor Garneau.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Zach and Ian. As I read this, I caught nods to small businesses, but not a lot of in-depth there. And coming from the small business community and building on some of Councillor Miller's comments about the businesses that are already here, where do they fit, and how do we make sure that we're supporting them the best we can? Because I know in the planning side of things, we've had some files that have been challenging lately, some that made it as far as the horseshoe, some that didn't get that far before they ran into hurdles. And I want to make sure that as important as it is to attract the big investments that bring the big tax drivers, that we're also facilitating that growth on the very local level, because you never know when one of those is going to take off to become one of our big players around town.
Yeah, through the chair. Thanks for the question, Councillor Garneau. A few comments, and then maybe I'll ask Ian to chime in. But you know, I think there's an existing network that's here to serve County of Brant businesses, and I don't know if we've quite utilized it to its fullest. So there is a provincially funded small business enterprise center in the city of Brantford that is here to support our entrepreneurs. So that's a message we have to kind of get out and work with their staff to make sure, you know, when they're getting that business consulting, they're looking at the right zoning bylaw and those types of things. You know, we have entities like Enterprise Brant, you know, our CFDC that we want to work with more, and just let people know, like, you're not alone in this. There's a network that you can kind of utilize. And I think another piece of that is, we really want to improve our skill set on the economic development side of setting people up for success once they walk through the door to go through a planning application process or what have you, and just continue to kind of build our relationships and make sure we're doing all we can do. So, Ian, I don't know if you have some additional thoughts as well.
No, sorry, through you, Mr. Chair. I think the only part that I'd like to comment on, when you go through the strategy and you think about or you see conversations or points about investment attraction and dealing with investors and all that great stuff, again, most people, their head goes right to that external investor, but that's heavily focused on your internal business community. And that's part of the process. So further to what Zach's saying, that there's some inherent built-in language in here that it's about dealing with the investor and helping them out. That pertains to the local business community as well, because they are one of your primary investors in the community.
Allison?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. And I'm sorry to jump in here again. I just want to speak a little bit to the history of this, because there is reason why this hasn't evolved a little bit more internally. And I know it's been a historical struggle for this division, because we don't want to duplicate efforts. There's limited resources, and because there is a small business enterprise center and enterprise branch that does serve this catchment area, we've always sort of thought, okay, maybe that's not where county resources are best utilized, because those small business support services already exist. We do work with the BIA and the local, the downtown cores, that sort of thing, because that was sort of a missing piece. But we didn't want to duplicate the efforts of the existing network that was there and sort of duplicate limited resources in those areas. However, we also recognize that those support services maybe aren't where we want them to be in the county. So I definitely think that's a discussion that needs to be had, of revisiting those terms of reference, and maybe having a talk with at the provincial level about how those services are best delivered. Is that something that are taken internally? If so, then we need to reallocate funding models. But I agree that is sort of the reason why that has never been more prominent within the economic development division. However, I do think it needs to be part of our business retention and expansion program, and I think it also needs to be something that we revisit in terms of how those services are delivered on a regional basis.
Councilor Chambers?
And just, if I might, with the expert here, I'd like to have his comments on something else, a comment that I'll make. And that comment is this. In the olden days, healthy municipalities, and you measured the health of municipalities by the ratio of residential assessment and industrial assessment. The rule of thumb back in the day was 80 residential, 20 industrial was considered pretty good. Historically, Brant County was more like 90-10. About 2 terms ago, the county took a bold move and purchased land and went into industrial development by owning land and developing it themselves and selling. After that happened, the residential industrial ratio went more like 85-15, and that carried on for a term and a half or so, when the county took a bold change in philosophy to abandon the concept of owning and develop its own land and relying on developers to develop land that they owned. And a result of that was, again, the industrial residential ratio started going closer to 90-10. I don't know what it is now, but I think it's probably closer to maybe 90 2.8, something like that, because we've had such an increase in the residential growth. So if we, and as a result of that, what's happening to our tax increases, we're going from 2 and 3 and 4 to now 5, 7, 8, 9, and I would suggest and hope that this strategy can maybe change that trend, which I think has been adverse over the last few years compared to what it was the previous 5, and much better than it was back in the day when we didn't even have an economic development department. When, after amalgamation, we didn't have an economic development department. And it was only about 2 terms in that we started focusing and keying on this, and that's when we took the step of developing our own land, and that really had an impact on our residential industrial ratio, which had a positive impact on our tax increases. So it's all related, and to have a strategy, I'm hoping that the residential industrial ratio will get more and more better as time goes on. And quite frankly, I'm not seeing that in this economic development strategy because we're focusing too much on community development rather than attracting industrial development.
Yeah, to the chair. Thank you, Councillor Chambers. I certainly hear your concern, but again, I reiterate, we have significant industrial investors in this community that are just working through, different requirements to kind of get up and going. And part of this strategy is working with them to, move forward with site plan applications and building permits and get those structures up. During the COVID period, especially, we saw, institutional investors like Panattoni and Orlando come and invest here in the county. So I really do think it's just a matter of time where we can really kind of flip that switch and be much more proactive in terms of, driving business here and generating that new tax assessment revenues. And I'll defer to either Ian or Allison if they have additional comments as well.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Zach. That's a loaded question that I wouldn't even stick my neck out to try to answer. Part of it is, well, 2 things. In industrial investment into industrial markets, a lot of it has to do with timing. So there's so many factors that would have went into the success that you've had years ago. I think the only comment that I want to make, whether you own the land, whether someone else owns the land, if you have no land, you're not in the game. You do have land. You do have opportunity for investment, which is good. The strategy that you have in front of you is an investment into your future. And it's more than just industrial development, which is key to driving economic development. And again, I'm going back to your community development and economic development are so closely linked together that the strategy that you have lays out, in our opinion, a clear path for success that's more than just industrial development. And I'm just going to leave it at that, if that's okay.
Allison?
Through you, Mr. Chair, and Zach did allude to this earlier. I would just note that we have at the table right now, like owned and conceptually designed about 5 million square feet that's waiting. I mean, it's not going to happen all at once, but 5 million square feet of owned and conceptually planned land that's waiting on the infrastructure, and that's not including Kingsville. So I think it might be a little bit of careful what you wish for, because I feel like the floodgates are going to open once the infrastructure is there in place, and we're waiting on some provincial approvals for that. But I understand what you're saying. I think we're caught in a bit of a cyclical process right now, and once that comes, again, we're going to see that sort of boom come in of some of it. And I share your concerns. I want to see that assessment ratio change.
Dr. Kyle.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Through you to Zach and Ian. I thought the strategy looks really good. My question is kind of a logistical nature. So I'm wondering to kind of pick up on what Councillor Garneau was asking about and a little bit about from Councillor Miller, particularly with our small businesses or our businesses that are already existing here. How does this strategy interplay with other departments and other policies and things like that, planning, for example? I'm just wondering how this helps to shape what a decision might be, or how you get to the best outcome for a business, particularly one that's here, that's maybe looking to expand, but perhaps they're not in an area that's zoned employment, for example, but they're also not Adidas. They're not going to go out and they're not going to be buying our employment lands per se. How does this support those businesses?
To the chair, to you, Councillor Kyle. Yeah, I think that really speaks to our first theme, and especially goal 2. And I think it's just ECDEV kind of doing the upfront work to make sure whoever's ready to come in and invest understands, what they need to be able to, what they have to do to be successful, and understand the pros and cons, and if they were to pursue lands that might need an application from development services. I think we're really that first step and the kind of first person, and I really do think of us becoming that concierge that helps guide them through the process and connects them, and maybe we can identify funding. So we kind of work to liaise all these different networks, so we're not sending them in 1,000 different directions if they want to move forward, and I think that's part of what we want to accomplish here.
Any more questions? Before I go back to you, Councillor Bell, anybody else that you spoke? No? John, we good?
It's sort of along with Robert Chambers' questions about industrial, and it's sort of what you alluded to. And I just wanted to point out that, yeah, it's, I think, a big part of our progress is working with the other levels of government too. And so I think at the Good Roads Conference, for instance, we had a meeting with the Ministry of Transportation and trying to get the off-road ramps off the 403 so that we can work more effectively and get our permits going and get that industrial started. But yeah, somehow we have to really work on the other levels of government, not only our own. So, and working with Brantford and surrounding communities as well. So.
Councillor Pierce, you have anything? Mr. Mayor? Oh.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Zach, the county's official plan was submitted to the ministry a year ago. We approved it about a year ago. As I was reading through your background report, there were quite a few times where you actually referred to other data sources. I'm a little concerned that we're not using the official plan and our forecasts in there to guide the development of all kinds of strategies in our community. One thing that comes out to me from our official plan forecast, the number of seniors is going to grow rapidly, and with it, the opportunities for a significant boost in the healthcare sector and the long-term care sector seems to me missing from this strategy. I would suggest that the next time we revise it, we do look very carefully at that. I look to Brantford and I see they're building very large long-term care facilities. I know it's not Brantford doing it, but they're encouraging it to be done. And I think the opportunity is there and we should not miss that. Just as an indicator, I went up with the mayor to Queensview a couple of weeks ago to celebrate their 11th anniversary. And I was astounded to know that they have 50 staff for 80 residents. I mean, it's a huge, it can be a huge employer. John Noble Home is another example. We have 300 staff in John Noble Home. And so I think it's an area that, you know, quite naturally, we're all going to grow older. There will be a much greater senior population. I think we might want, and Brian's nodding his head now, we might want to take an opportunity to be a part of that. It's a comment.
Thank you, Councillor Bell. Anything else? Stay right there, Zach. We're going to move right into the report 4.8.1. There is recommendation. Somebody put it on the floor. Moved by Councillor Pierce, second by Councillor Bell. Councillor.
Yeah, I support the resolution. I'm just wondering, Mr. Chairman, quite often we have all these plans and that, and we see them on the screen, and then I don't have a printer that is capable of printing these kind of things, but I think it's important. I would like a paper copy of not only this report, but any other master plan or whatever, but certainly this one I would like, and maybe everybody else wants one as well, but if we could get a paper copy, I would be happy to support it.
Duly noted. Anything else? Councillor Bell.
Just one brief comment, Mr. Chair. There's an awful lot of reading there. If we're to communicate this to our community, we have to be very, very simple. And I don't know how you get it into one page and how you translate what the strategy is going to do for the county. But that should be your objective in my mind. I can't think how I tell people this in a concise way. I need help.
Well, thank you, Zach and Ian. If there's no further comments, call the question. All those in favor? Moving on. Adoption of the minutes from February 6, 2024. Moved by Councillor Howes, seconder. Councillor McAlpine. Any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Business arising from the minutes. Seeing none, moving on to consent items 7.1.1 to 7.14. Somebody want to put it on the floor, and anybody want to be pulled? Councillor Howes on the floor. Seconder, Councillor Pierce. Councillor Howes, you want to pull one?
Yes, please, Mr. Chair. I'd like to pull 7.1.3.
I figured that. Go ahead.
So through the chair, I had some questions regarding the Brant Transit late cancellation policy. To whom am I directing those questions? All right, thank you. So, Melissa, first I wanted to say, connected to this, how valuable these monthly reports are that are coming to council. They're fantastic, full of great details that help us respond when we have questions or concerns that are expressed to us. And I'm going to bring this around to a question specific to this item, but related to that, I had a question, just a bit on the math, and like I say, these reports are so informative. When I read the last report from last week, it said that 4,131 rides were requested, and we have an 88.1% met demand rate, which is really good. But it also said that 1,960 rides were completed. And that math doesn't all connect for me. Like if you take 88% of 4,131, it's 3,635 rides. But So that's a question I don't necessarily need an answer on the spot, but that's something I'm curious about. More specific to the late policy, it's disturbing that we have so many cancellation policies, or sorry, canceled rides, and I recall from the April report, 880 cancellations. That's a lot. And that 450 of them were related to the same 50 riders. And the proposal on how to basically mitigate that issue through a tiered system of response makes a lot of sense to me. I respect it. My one question is, have we looked, in addition, not instead of, but in addition to those steps that are recommended, have we looked at starting to charge the repeat offenders for the rides they didn't take? Has that been part of the discussion? Pros, cons? I was wondering if you could discuss that a little bit, please.
Thank you. Through the chair to Councillor House, thank you for your question. So we did consider that. However, about 10% of our riders use credit card. So it would only allow us to actually charge a penalty fee to about 10% of our riders. Our other riders are using punch cards, cash. That's our hiccup.
Follow up through the chair. So basically it's a mechanism issue that prevents us from being able to. Okay. All right. That answers the question. Thank you.
Councilor Garneau, did you want to pull?
I did. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question on 7.1.1. That's the community partnership policy.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Stacy's here. This one's to Phil. Through you, I was wondering where the community safety groups would fall in this. And forgive me, there was a lot of reading material. I was trying to sort it out on my own before the meeting. So under one framework, which is through the Police Services Board, they're not allowed to fundraise or get donations, which means they don't have money. But if I understood this correctly, they might be phased out of free meeting space, which would put this very specific set of community partners in a precarious position. Yes, for sure. So the community safety groups are a citizen partnership with the OPP. There's one in Paris, one in Brant North, and one in Brant East. And as I understand it, under some of the framework that's coming through the Police Services Board, there are rules that prevent them from fundraising or soliciting donations because of their relationship with the police. So they're basically not allowed to have money. But if I understood correctly through this, they may be phased out of having free access to county meeting space.
Through the chair, I will get back to you on that one because that specific detail I don't have. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can put it in a Friday file for you.
Thanks.
Anything else? Motion to approve them all. All in favor? Thank you. No consent items to be received. Staff reports. 8.1 is done. 8.2, election. Madam Clerk? There's a recommendation, or there's, somebody want to move it? Councilor Howes? Mr. Mayor? Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Through the chair to committee, I can't believe that we're already here talking about this. However, this is the first of many election reports for 2026. So the current report at hand is just essentially an overview of what it is that we're looking at with regards to the very first item which we will be addressing, which is boundary review and council composition. sorry, just going to grab my report. So what I've presented to you in this report is essentially a snapshot of where we're at in terms of overall electors, where it's looking like we might potentially be in 2026. And the purpose of providing those statistics is just as background information to assist committee and council in making a decision in terms of what we want to do. So the first graphic, which I have here, is just essentially noting where we're at right now in terms of the 5 wards with elector population and their associated percentage change. Now, one reason why I'm presenting this is because I wanted the opportunity to provide just some notes to the statistics, because they're not as clear cut. And so the first thing that I'd like to note with this is with regards to the 2024 electors. As you guys might remember, there's been a change in terms of the voters list provision. So for elections up until 2022, we were with MPAC. As of January 1, 2024, that has changed to Elections Ontario. So the data source is different. So I'm noting that because I can't say how much of this particular change is as a result of that change in data source. Traditionally, the MPAC voters list was weak on renters. Whether or not there's a substantial amount of renters in Ward 2 and Ward 3, which could account for some of this large population increase, we just don't know. However, I will note that this 2024 figure is what Elections Ontario currently has listed as electors in each of the 5 wards, and if there were a by-election called, these would be the numbers that we're looking at today. So what I've done is I've just done a graphic, because when we see large fluctuations like we have in the previous data set, it looks like there's a huge change, but when you look at the actual distribution, with the highest being Ward 3, with the amount of 21.65%, and then the lowest being Ward 4 at 17.22%, although there is statistical differentiation within that. There's not a huge differential between all 5 wards as it currently sits. And my understanding is that historically within the county, there's always been a differential between the wards to a certain degree. So we've done some very preliminary statistical forecasting. And by we, I mean the policy planning team has put together some very preliminary data. So of what the wards might look like in terms of elector population in 2026, which would be when the next election is, and then further on into 2030. So again, a few notes in terms of this data and why we kind of haven't gone any further down the statistical analysis with this, because it is really preliminary. So one, this is based on the forecasted annual growth rate, which is evened out over, I understand, a 30-year time. So we're taking a projected rate that's anticipated to occur over 30 years, so steady, and we're projecting it onto a very narrow time period. So that would be my first kind of caveat. Second to that is the data which was provided by policy planning is residents. There's an assumption built into this that the electors, the forecasted annual growth rate will hold the same for only electors, which is 18 and above, as it would for the entire population. As to whether or not that's true, I don't know. I'm just noting it as an assumption. Third assumption is that obviously all of the policy planning, all the forecasting would be, I'm assuming, based on certain over the next 30 years infrastructure being online. So if any of that were to change in the immediate short term, obviously it would impact the growth. But the purpose of providing you with this information is just to say that this is our best guess right now, subject to all of those notes, what the elector population may look like in 2026. So for the next election that we're talking about, and then further on into 2030. The purpose of this report, giving you all of that information, is to say what we're proposing is to do some preliminary consultation over this summer. So essentially an online engaged grant survey with members of the public, asking some very specific questions, noting this information. Is there any public appetite for ward boundary changes, which could be anything? Adding a ward, taking away a ward, changing the boundaries. And the same thing with council composition, right? Again, could be the same, could be any type of changes. So this initial consultation period, we're not anticipating going into any proposed solution, just whether or not people feel the wards as they currently sit adequately represent them, and whether or not council composition adequately represents them. Similarly, we're going to have a anonymous counselor survey, which is going to be investigating these same things. We'll be back in the fall with the results of that survey, coupled with the statistical data, to put the question to you: given everything that we have, are you interested in further investigating a ward boundary adjustment and or council composition adjustment, or are we happy leaving things status quo? As I've noted in the report, if we do decide at that time to go down the ward boundary review pathway, we would be looking at bringing a consultant on board just to engage with the public consultation. That would be a more fulsome public consultation, which would involve in-person meetings along with an online component. And at that point, we would see what the consultant recommends. At this point, the recommendation of the report is just to approve that plan.
Questions? Clear as mud. No questions. Councilor Chambers.
I'm willing to move the recommendation, and I have a comment.
Go ahead.
If you want to get a seconder, but
Councilor
just
Kaufman.
my comment is this: the last time this was done, it was done, and I think you may have been the only one with me on council at the time, but it was done by committee of council rather than consultant. It ended up being appealed to the Ontario Municipal Board at that time, and the appeal was rejected. And the big bone of contention was that the Paris wards, wards 2 and 3, were actually they were the lowest populated wards. And the theory was that Paris was getting too many representatives. And the committee of council that was doing the study recognized that growth was going to happen in Paris. And I'm happy to see that our prediction at that time has certainly played out more than we thought. And the point of what I'm saying is that it can't be done too early. The Ontario Municipal Board appeal was done, I think, a month and a half before the deadline, so they had to do a rush job on it. But the more time you take, the better it is, but it has to be done prior to the election in enough time that if there is an appeal, that it can be dealt with. And it is hard to look into the future for population growth, but I think that's what you have to do. I would like to have the people that appeal. It was appealed by members of council. 3 members of council appealed the recommendation and the position of the county. It would be nice to have those 3 back here to see that the Ward 2 and 3 are now the most populous wards in the county.
Anything else? Call the question. All those in favor?
Lucas online has a question.
Good evening, Lucas.
Good evening. Through the chair to Alicia. In terms of the data provided by MPAC, is it essentially you just get the data, like those numbers there, the population per ward, or is there more detailed geographical information tied to it? I.e., do we essentially have like a heat map to work with in terms of where our population currently is?
through the chair to Councillor Oakley. So it's no longer MPAC, so the new Elections Ontario portal has just come online for us. In terms of where those population pockets might be, I don't know. I could take a look at what they have. The MPAC would not have allowed for that without significant work on our end. So we would be able to download the addresses, but then GIS would have to somehow plot those. As to whether or not that could be done, I don't know. But my understanding is that this Elections Ontario portal is supposed to be have a lot more functionality, so we can take a look at that and see whether or not we're able to graphically map. We can map, so we can take a look at the ward and we can see, if you click on a property, you can see the electors there, but as to whether or not there's some way to show the numbers in a cohesive way to pull out for analysis, I'm not sure what would be needed to do that.
Thank you very much.
Any more questions? Call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. 8.3, Annual Performance Report from Stormwater Management. Councillor Belt, second by Councillor Howes. Go ahead, Rob.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here to talk about stormwater. Usually these reports are really boring or whatever. The first thing I want to say is this report and the next report, which Andrea is going to do a presentation on, really need to be looked at together. There's really a bigger picture here we got to talk about. So this is the first annual report we've done under a consolidated linear infrastructure environmental compliance approval, which is now a requirement of the province. And so every year this is going to come back, just like the wastewater report, just like the water report, very similar. As you can see by reading the report and the next report, there's lots of work to be done. Many municipalities, stormwater hasn't had a big emphasis. And there's reasons for that. When stormwater systems work, no one pays any attention to them. But a lot of our pipes are getting 80 to 100 years old. We got stormwater management facilities, which are now upwards of 25 and 30 years old. They're soon going to need the cleanouts. We're getting ready to start that. These cleanouts aren't cheap. I think we've got somewhere around 40 stormwater management ponds, something like that. It's not that the assets have been ignored. It's just time for more work to be done. The system is not in crisis, but you can't wait till you're in a crisis to forge a plan. Work ahead on it and see where you're going. Put together a sustainable plan for the future. I'm going to ask one question here before it gets asked. So, why are we asking for the FTE now? Why didn't we ask for it in the 2024 budget? Well, I'm going to answer that right now. We weren't really in a spot we thought we were in a position to know as well when we did. We were working on the 2024 budget in August, September of last year. So we weren't in a great position to do that. And quite frankly, the next report on the stormwater utility, we really thought we'd get the stormwater utility in place and then get the funding going and then ask for the FTE. So you can see we're going in a little different direction there, but we really need to get this work done. And if we wait a year from now to get this, if we wait for the 2025 decision package, just get that approved, go through the process of getting going, it'll be more than a year from now that we would get that person in place. We're anticipating now, even if we get approved now, it'd be maybe November that we do. So, there's quite a change in time there, and we've done enough of the business plan to know now that it's justified to have, and we really need to get going on that. So, with that, those are all my comments, and either myself or Andrew, who actually wrote this report, be glad to answer any questions.
Questions for Rob? Councillor Bell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Rob or Andrea. On page 4 of your report, you say 27 alterations to the system were authorised, with 7 having been identified as significant drinking water threats. That sounds really ominous. What do you mean? What is the threat there?
Yep, so through you, Chair, a significant drinking water threat is an activity that occurred within either an intake protection zone or a wellhead protection area. So our risk management official, Cambium, the consultant, they have developed that report for us to meet the requirements of the approval. So it just means that when that activity occurred and when it was designed, there were special considerations for the design and construction of that infrastructure.
Okay, could you give me an example?
The Paris Link sewage pump station, is that the one? Yep, so that's in the intake protection zone for Brantford, an IPZ2. So when they're designing that, they have to take into consideration if there are raw sewage overflows, where are they going? So the contingency plan for that facility cannot be that it goes into the Grand River, because then it would immediately affect the intake for Brantford.
So it was a significant drinking water threat to Brantford, not to the county.
That's right.
Okay. Thank you.
That example.
Councillor Miller.
Two questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through to Andrew or Rob. You're looking for a full-time equivalent. I think you laid out the reasons very well in the report. But my question is, you're taking it from the operating budget. What in the operating budget won't get done? Should we approve this?
Through you, Chair, to Councillor Miller, we do have a number of vacancies that we are experiencing and operating right now, and with those vacancies, I believe that we do have some gapping that we will be able to realize for those few months if we do get approval and hire that FTE in Q4 of 2024.
Okay. On page 213 of our package, you list all the complaints that come in through the year. One complaint, didn't see it, I got it. And I wanted to ask you, mosquito control for stormwater management ponds. We don't do any. They're left to be on their own natural. Just to be clear.
Through the chair to Councillor Miller, there's a lot of misconception out there about where mosquitoes would usually breed and whatever. Usually when the water is more than 10 inches deep and there's potential of wave action, there's very little opportunity for mosquitoes to breed, and most of our ponds are designed that way. So there's the assumption out there that they are mosquito breeding grounds when they really aren't. Now around them there's lots of other grading on properties and whatever, which clearly are mosquito breeding grounds, but generally stormwater management ponds are designed so that's not likely to happen.
Okay, and that's what I need to know. Thank you.
Any more questions? Seeing no more questions, there's been a motion to approve it. All those in favor? Thank you. 8.4, update and develop the stormwater utility program. Andrew, motion to put it on the floor, moved by Councillor Pierce, second by Councillor Garneau.
So through you, Chair, to committee, I did prepare a few slides for this conversation. I don't think I'm quite as comfortable up here as my boss, Rob Walton, so I just wanted to organize my thoughts in front of committee. So just a really brief agenda for the next few slides. I have a couple of definitions. I do realize that the lengthy report and there are some technical concepts in there, so I wanted to make sure that everybody is on the same page as we walk through the conversation. A little bit of a summary about why we're here, the engagement results, what we've learned, and the recommended next steps. So the stormwater management system is a collective design, is the collective design and controls for stormwater runoff in the County of Brant. In the County of Brant, the stormwater management program is comprised of infrastructure management, which is illustrated in the infographic on the left, with assets valued at $183 million. This work is focused primarily in settlement areas and has both operating and capital programs and budgets associated with it. The County of Brant, being a rural community, also has over 300 kilometers of municipal drains that are managed under the Drainage Act. The Stormwater Management Program is the overarching program responsible
to ensure the ongoing operation of the stormwater management system, excluding the municipal drains. This includes maintenance, repairs, and replacements of the infrastructure, and speaks to all the activities that are required through the environmental compliance approval that we just discussed. The stormwater utility program is the conversation about how we're going to fund the stormwater management program and the capital works for the stormwater management system. Currently, the stormwater management program is funded through the general tax levy, and staff are exploring the benefits of changing the funding mechanism to a utility type structure. So why are we here? We are looking at developing an equitable and sustainable funding mechanism for stormwater management in the County of Brant. We want to bring equity to residents across the county based on the system that they contribute to, and we want to provide sustainable asset management by being financially responsible in both the short and long term. Changes to the ministry approvals process is holding us more accountable to ongoing operations and maintenance of the infrastructure, and the province is also holding municipalities accountable to a standardized approach for municipal infrastructure management through asset management plans. With increased budgetary pressures, staff have also identified a need to identify the short and long-term financial needs of the stormwater management program, and this will ensure that the county is financially responsible for the ongoing performance of the system without creating significant budget spikes in future replacement years. So, engagement. Over the last 10 months, staff completed a detailed investigation and developed the stormwater utility proposal with the public engagement. We had 3,100 visitors viewing the Engage Brant webpage, 307 surveys completed, and 136 residents that attended public meetings. The key points from the survey were that residents were not familiar with the stormwater management system. They do not have concerns about stormwater affecting their properties, and they are not supportive of a dedicated funding source for the stormwater management program. Some more of the key points from the engagement were that they were not supportive of the perceived additional cost or a new tax. This is important because it became very clear through the engagement process that the community did not understand that there is an existing budget associated with the stormwater management program. Residents would prefer to keep the budget on the general tax levy and also had affordability concerns. There were a number of comments about differing service levels across the settlement areas, and there were also concerns about funds from one settlement area being allocated to another settlement area. Residents expressed an interest in incentive and rebate programs, and they would also like to see the development community contribute more to the ongoing operations and maintenance of the stormwater management system. These few points here on this slide are not an exhaustive list. There are very detailed comments from the engagement in the attachments of the report. So what have we learned? The stormwater utility proposal and the associated engagement has highlighted the diversity of this community and the challenges with developing a one-size-fits-all approach related to stormwater utility funding for a community like Brant. There is a lack of understanding around the intent of the proposal, the reasons why we're having this conversation about responsible funding, and the lack of understanding of the stormwater management systems in the county. And through all the feedback we received from the surveys, forums, and the PICs, we did get some valuable input on concepts to consider for future iterations of the proposal. So our recommended next steps. We recommend reviewing and addressing misconceptions with the current proposal, firstly with the perception of a new tax, and secondly with enhanced education of stormwater infrastructure, which is often invisible to the community. We also recommend completing a long-term financial plan assessment, which will provide more detailed revenue and reserve requirements, as well as a recommendation on how best to smooth out multi-year budgets to support the stormwater operating and capital budgets. We will reach out to municipalities that have stormwater utility programs implemented and gather information on lessons learned, including what went well and what they would do differently. And we will also review the ability to update the stormwater utility proposal to incorporate some of the key points from the engagement around differing service levels, sharing funds between settlement areas, as well as the potential for incentive programs. And that sums up my presentation.
Question for Andrew. Councilor House.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Andrea. So I was pleased halfway through your whereases, I was happy to see the words more consultation is required before implementing a program. And having attended both of the public sessions, and you're very accurate in your summary to say more education is required, more communication. I just wanted to, for anyone who's watching this meeting or people who are interested in this subject, just wanted to be clear that your recommendation tonight is not taking us in any specific direction. It's acknowledging that we need to do more, we need to educate more, we need to engage more, and that we're basically committing to doing that before council makes any decisions. Just wanted to confirm that.
Through you, Chair, to Councillor House. Yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, Andrea. Yeah, you said we're learning. We're all learning. I learned the budget wasn't too popular with a lot of the people that gave feedback, and I think a lot of that has been reflected on this program. I think timing's everything, so don't take it all to heart. I think we bear a lot of that. But I thought I knew it fairly well, and I was prepared for questions, and then I find out, boy, there's a lot about this I don't know. I understand, you want that fairness between people that pay for their own municipal drains versus, coming off the general tax levy to pay for stormwater. And just to be clear, there are parts, I know in the Burford settlement area, that are part of municipal drains. The Lewis drain and the Sites drain, and those people that pay for the upkeep of that would be, they would have this levy on them, and the municipal drain component would come off. Is that correct? That's the proposal, I guess, at this time.
Through you, Chair, to Councillor Miller. Yes, the current proposal was suggesting that any municipal drains within the settlement area would be funded through the stormwater utility program.
And that may change, that may not, but that's where we're at right now. And then the other question was, and you identified it as the feedback. The amount of stormwater infrastructure isn't consistent across the county, but the levy would be. It would be imposed on those in a settlement area. And I had no answer for couple people on the 6th concession, Burford, on the 8th concession. They said, what's the difference between the stormwater management on the 6th concession versus the 7th concession? Or the 5th concession, or say the 8th versus the 9th? And I didn't have an answer for them, other than if you're on the 9th, you wouldn't get the levy. If you're on the 8th in the settlement area, you would. If you're on the 5th, you wouldn't get it, but if you're on the 6th of the settlement area, you would. So I don't know how to answer those people. So I don't know if you want to answer that now, or that's something that I think we need to be cognizant of going forward.
Yep. Through you, Chair, to Councillor Miller. That's one of the things that, the first kick at the can with this proposal was to develop some rules around how we would implement a utility structure. Looking at the settlement areas was the first approach. I do realize, and through the feedback, differing service levels between settlement areas, it does get challenging because even within settlement areas, there's differing service levels. And how do we create an approach, again, for a very diverse community like the County of Brant, that does feel equitable. So I understand what you're saying. We heard that through the community, and we're going to keep that in mind as we move forward.
Okay, just something to look at. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you too, Andrea. Like Councillor Howes, I sat through some of these meetings. Uncomfortable for everybody, I think. But to go to the core of it, I mean, what you were suggesting was a single tariff for residential customers, essentially, of $12 per month. So I asked the question of our finance department, in our existing tax levy, how much of that from the median house goes to stormwater management? And the answer, and Heather, you correct me, I think you said it was $136. So we're already collecting 136, and yet we want to move to a new system which collects 144. Actually, $8 difference. We created a real furore for $8. But the worst part of it is, I think, if you're in a home that is valued at more than the median house price, you're actually going to get money back. And if you're in a house that's valued less than the median home house price, you're going to have to pay relatively more. And I'm not sure when we think about equity that we got that right. I think we need to have some mechanism that ties, for example, the square footage of the house to the price that is paid. I cannot countenance charging somebody living in a relatively small home on minimum salary or income, that we're asking them to pay more than somebody who's got a huge great house out in whichever estate that is also just paying its $12 a month. So when you go through this exercise again, I think you need to really categorize how individual groups of people are going to be affected by this. And if we have a mechanism that actually relates what you pay to something like the size of the house, I think that would go down better. Thank you.
Councillor Chambers?
Thank you. You've probably been paying attention to the city of Hamilton that is going through this, and they're tying themselves in knots. There's a recent article in the Spectator that said that their system should be more like the Brant County proposal. So I don't know, we might be doing something better than Hamilton. Results around the Hamilton is charging agricultural properties, and Brant County is proposing to exempt agricultural properties. But I'll let you deal with Hamilton and make sure that we're doing better than they are. The other comment that I would have is one thing that is really confusing to me and is confusing to a lot of people is in the settlement areas where municipal drains traverse through the settlement areas, starting at agricultural properties, ending at agricultural properties, but in the middle there are in the settlement area, which really causes a lot of wondering who's paying for what and why they're paying for this, and whether the farmers can still petition for the drain, and if there's appeals, all that kind of stuff. And I know General Manager Walton is up on that kind of stuff, and I know he'll have it sorted out. He doesn't have to explain it now. But the one other aspect of that is in some settlement areas, and I'll use Harley for example, they have just went through, or just in the process of going through the Bennett drain, and they're being assessed and charged for that. And then if they have to pay all that, then they're all of a sudden there's another ding on them for 100. Those problems really have to be resolved, because what's happening, what will happen is you will pit the rural residents against the urban residents and vice versa, and that's never a good thing. And this, I can see, if it's not done right, will make that a terrible situation.
Through the chair to Council Chambers, excellent examples you bring up and things we have to consider. Before you mentioned the Bennett drain in Harley, I was going to get up and talk about the Bennett drain in Harley because there's an example of an entire community affected by one drain. It's going to be newly updated. We're going to have a new report. The maintenance on it will be all dealt with through that, and the Drainage Act provides everything we need to fairly maintain that in the future. So that's the example of a community we might actually exempt entirely from the charge and just let it be dealt with through the Drainage Act. Because I think the main thing here is the fairness and the sustainability. One other thing we get into is an example of Northwest Drain in Paris, which I stood at this very podium in about 1990, was the engineer that actually designed that drain. And it was entirely unpopular because it was before amalgamation. South Dumfries was opposed to the drain, where it was entirely constructed in South Dumfries. So we have a situation now where we've got a drain report where, I don't know, a couple hundred homes in Paris that all exist in Paris now have to pay into this drain. But I'm going to guarantee you that that report isn't set up to actually build that thing out anymore, because it was never updated as the properties. That was a field at the time. So we got to find ways to make this all sustainable. This is all part of that. I think these details will work out as we go towards bylaw, but we're not going towards bylaw now. We're going towards education, development of a better financial plan as to how it all needs to go, whether we go under, taxation, whether we go under taxation, which is to an area taxation for this, or whether we go to a utility fee, or whether we leave it as it is. There's all of those options there. We're going to come back with more details. And I think that was the only thing that was acceptable to anybody right now, because there were so many questions asked. But this is the right thing to do. We need to address the problems out there. What we're doing right now is not sustainable and it's not fair. So how do we address those for everybody?
And just a couple other points on what General Manager Walton says. In some settlement areas, there are stormwater retention ponds that are part of municipal drains. Scotland is a good example of that. Sites Drain is a good example of that. There are other areas in settlement areas, such as the Lewis Drain, that drain a drainage area, but there are areas outside of the area piped into the Lewis Drain as an outlet, and those kind of issues that can cause problems as well.
Councillor Oakley?
Thanks. Rob actually just partially answered my question. My question was in regards to, it's mentioned in the motion specifically that you're going to be coming back looking at a revised utility policy. I was curious whether or not you were considering special tax areas. You know, there's many of our neighboring municipalities use that, and as we saw in our boundary review, I think it's a precedent we're probably going to have to look at more closely, as parts of our community are in very different periods of growth. You know, Paris is knocking on the doors of soon moving from a town to a small city, and thus discussions like fixed route transit might be relevant. And I'm curious whether or not that was part of the conversation, rather than looking at utility system, looking at special tax areas so we can more cohesively and holistically deal with region-specific costs such as the stormwater.
Through the chair to Councillor Oakley, yes, that is something that we'll look at. I want to get back in just something, though, that Councillor Chambers asked, and one thing that we can deal with that under our proposal for stormwater utility can dealt with very well, and use the example of the Lewis Drain, which is on the boundary of Burford at the west side there. Actually, in the future, we could actually use it to do both. So we could collect from the people in Burford on the stormwater utility, use that money to pay their assessments into the Lewis Drain and leave it as a municipal drain. So that is something that actually will work out very well if we go down that direction. So I think there's a hybrid of the systems which can be implemented and work very well. The thing we're going to remember here is, though, for some fringe part of the population, this is not going to be acceptable, and it's not going to be seen to be fair. But we deal with that on every issue that we come up with. So I think we have to look at the best way on average to go forward, and we'll come back to that. We're not there yet. That's why we've asked for more time to get to where we need to be. And you know, we can't tell you right now which direction we're going. We need to research a little more. When we were doing the consultation, and Andrea and others looked up some of the stuff that was in the press right now from Hamilton and other places. City of Toronto's going through the same thing. City of Barrie, all negativity towards this, and those are urban areas where, you know, the differences aren't as much as in Brant County. What I said to Andrea, what we need to do is we need to go and visit London, Kitchener, Guelph, maybe talk to them. They've got well-established programs that they've been going on for years. You know, what did you do right there? What are the real benefits to this? And bring that back to, not all these programs it isn't all negativity. We need to learn what's really gone right in these other places. And I think positivity is a good thing.
Any more questions? Just one comment was, I think we all learned a lot in those two meetings, and we've seen the rise of the temperature of a lot of people, and most of it was, I believe, was misinformed information that they were coming to the meetings with. And good thing we had them back then, because if we had it now, they would be worse than the Leaf fans after a loss the other night. So had to get that in person. Call the question. It's been moved to second it. All those in favor? Thank you. Moving on. 8.5, County of Brant Climate Action Plan. Adam. Come on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I am pleased to introduce to all of you Haley Gilmore. She is the new project manager in corporate strategy. One of the main things she's been tasked with right off the bat is the development of a climate action plan. So this is much of her report and kind of working towards the things we've been working on probably the last year or so. The report kind of provides a little bit of a revised work plan. I presented one back in November 2023 to look at a more holistic view of our climate action plan. Based off some requests we've received from the Brant Waterways, we've kind of split this off, seeing that there's a little bit more of a community desire to be involved in this. So the first part will be much more of our corporately focused energy conservation and demand management plan. That will be presented to council in a final draft during the June cycle. We're currently finalizing that. And then the second component will be a more community-focused engagement plan. And we're hoping to have that presented towards the end of 2024, and Haley will be spearheading that. Short of that, I'm happy to answer any questions, or Haley as well.
Councillor Bell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Adam. The electricity emissions have gone down by 63%, but our electricity usage has gone down by 1%. So I'm thinking renewables. Am I right?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So the best way to explain that is that the coefficient that the provincial government uses to measure the greenhouse gas emissions that are generated from electricity has gone down significantly through the reduction and the elimination of coal. So yes, renewables, not directly attributed to our renewables, which is something we're going to present in this plan to show just how much renewable energy the County of Brant owns and has produced well over a decade now. But much of that, yes, is the use of renewables. One concern that I've kind of read coming up with a need for additional electricity generation or storage is the use of natural gas plants, which will actually end up driving that coefficient of greenhouse gas emissions back up potentially over the next 5 to 10 years. So it's difficult to sort of rest on our laurels to say, well, we've reduced the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that we're generating through our electricity usage. You have to find that proper balance. And two, through this reporting, it's very much just on straight usage. It's not about the renewable electricity generation that we produce through our solar capacity. But I think something we're going to sort of examine is we're looking at the Wilkin Family Community Center being a net zero facility. That's fantastic. How are we going to correlate that? How are we going to report on that? And the part of that plan really does kind of speak to some of the things that the county is doing to be much more proactive corporately.
Any more questions? Seeing none, all those in favor of the report? Thank you. Stay right there, Adam. 8.6, overview of downtown Paris redevelopment. There is a recommendation. Somebody want to move it? Moved by Councillor Howes, second by Councillor Kyle. Go ahead, Adam.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Before you tonight is the first of many progress updates on the implementation of the Downtown Paris Master Plan. Obviously, there's two main construction projects going on. One is the reconstruction of West River Street, a very small portion of which was included in the Downtown Master Plan. The big component, obviously, is the reconstruction of Grand River Street North, which is planned for 2025. And then obviously in this report, I've also provided an update on a few of the other initiatives that we're working on, and just try to provide an overview of the status of things that are happening as they happen, while trying to provide some definitiveness before we come forward with very firm detailed plans. It's important to note that we're looking at reconstruction starting on Grand River Street sometime in the spring of 2025. So we do have a good 10 months to really prepare and refine the plans that we have to ensure that the project goes off as smoothly as possible. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Councillor Howes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Adam.
we look forward to continuing reports and updates, obviously, but it concerns me a little bit that, like you say, we're 10 minutes away from digging up downtown Paris. 10 months, and sorry.
We're starting out there right now.
It shows you how my concern is. 10 months away from digging a hole in downtown Paris. And it feels like it's been years since we've engaged with the public on the detail of this project. And I'm talking about detailed design. I remember being over at the Wincy Mill. I'm not even sure I was on council at that point. That's been 6 years. So can you, I know it's not in the report. I know you've got other reports coming up, but can you give us a little bit of detail anecdotally now about what are our plans to show our community what this is going to look like when it's done, what the stages are, because we're going to be asked constantly over the next 10 months. If you could speak a little bit to that, please.
Certainly, through you, Mr. Chair. Really, the business community consultation has been slightly ongoing, but starts really tomorrow morning. There's a contingent of us going to the BIA Board of Management meeting tomorrow to present this directly to them. So that'll be an important first step. Obviously, my colleagues, all you have to do is look at the reviewed by and copied to list on the end of this report. It's a really an effort across the entire organization to make sure this goes off without a hitch. The big part of the consultation that will be coming up will probably happen towards the end of the summer. We are working with the county's consultant, J.L. Richards, to prepare some better visuals, really. I mean, one thing begats another. They focused on the underground design. Now they're working on the above ground streetscaping design. And then we'll work at the finishing touches, the benches, the street lamps, waste receptacles. Those are things that I think will sort of really tie everything together. The one massive component of this is universal design guidelines to provide accessibility not just for those who need it, but for everyone, and especially as people age. We're obviously an aging community. It'll be helpful to ensure that sort of future-proofs the downtown to a place that everyone can access over this is a once in a generation or 2 generation project, and we want to make sure we get it right. So as this process goes along, I think you're going to see a little bit more visual. You're going to see some more prescient photos, some more, again, just much more visual updates, and there'll be some public consultation towards the end of the summer on that.
Just a quick follow-up, please, through the chair. Excuse me. Thank you for that, and I have faith in our engagement with the impacted businesses downtown, and that process. My concern, just to be clear, was a little bit more about the general public. I think there's people in our communities who, right now, think there might still be a 4-story parking garage being built 50 feet away from where we're sitting. And this report, I think, is the first time there's been anything in print that says that's not the plan. We've all talked about it, and we've all had coffee shop conversations about it. But so yeah, please, in your next report update, if you could give us a little bit more detail on that public engagement towards the end of the summer, it'd be appreciated.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I understand. Yeah, like as you said, this is a report that was adopted in 2019. It's funny sitting down and realizing in the report, yes, we are now in the phase, the actual time frame that the report called for, a 5 to 7 year implementation of some of the things we're working on now. But so much has changed. So perhaps, yes, an actual more fulsome update to the plan, or at least some explanations on what's changed, when it changed, and how it's changed over those sort of past 5 years probably is well needed. So.
Councilor Miller.
Is this what residents call the Big Dig?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, I believe it's being.
Okay. Maybe you don't know at this point, Adam, but how long is Grand River Street North supposed to be closed for? Is it going to be closed completely? Are we keeping one lane open?
If through you, Mr. Chair, I don't mind passing that over to my colleague, Mr. Walton, the General Manager of Operations.
Because I suspect these questions might come up tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Through the chair to Councilor Miller. So not all the details are worked out yet, but there are times in which this road will be closed entirely to traffic. We intend to keep the front doors of the businesses open throughout the project, except minor times you have to dig right there, right? So there'd be some closures of doors to businesses, but that'd be well communicated well ahead of time. But through when the main block is being done here for the deep dig, there's gonna be no traffic through there.
Any idea, Rob, could you guesstimate, or would that be irresponsible, how long that street will be closed?
No, that would be irresponsible for me to say that, really, until we can estimate ahead of time, but we can't really say that until we get the contractor's schedule. But our plan is to have this going as early as possible and have a contractor that's set up to do like the main block between Mechanic and William Street North or William Street in there as quickly as they can.
I'm just thinking about the businesses and how long they would have to be prepared, but I'll leave that for the BIA meeting.
Any more questions?
If I might, Mr. Chair, just to elaborate on that. Again, the plans that are being undertaken focus primarily on pedestrian access. So there'll be pedestrian cut-throughs, there'll be, blocks and plates to make sure that there's, the sidewalks are level, and boardwalks. We're looking at the use of ambassadors. I'm well aware that the reconstruction of Dundas Street in London, they literally had ambassadors walk, I hate to use the term, but little old ladies across the road to make sure that people can still access the businesses that they need to access to the best that we can manage. I mean, obviously, this is a major reconstruction project, but I think I want to convey to council that, and obviously the general public and the business community, these are things that we're well aware of, and we are working on plans to mitigate them as best as we can.
Councilor Bell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Adam. Adam, if you walk down Mechanic Street or walk down Grand River Street, the distance between the sidewalk or the elevation of the sidewalk and any given entrance there must be 50 different varieties of that. How are we going to normalize that?
I'll attempt to answer. I'll throw it back over to Rob, but as I understand it, we're effectively going to try to match them as best we can. And I think there's one side of the road that is much easier to do that and effectively kind of zone it so that there's a consistency and avoid sort of waves in the sidewalk. Rob, did you want to provide any more?
Through the chair to Councilor Bell, this is very difficult. And the fact, though, that we're going to be working with a much wider sidewalk gives us more ability to do this. Now, there's somebody in the audience here tonight whose building is maybe going to have some changes inside to make it work. And there's already been some discussions happening on that with a couple of people. So there are some options here. There's some situations which will not be able to be made perfect, but you live with that in any downtown reconstruction. It is what it is. We're going to make it the best that we can, and there will be some creative things done in a few places.
Just a short follow-up, if I may. Are we taking the responsibility for making it as good as it possibly can be? Or are we expecting individual businesses, property owners to contribute to the answers?
Through the chair to Councilor Bell, I believe there'll be some situations where the businesses will be contributing to their improvements as well. What we're doing outside though will be all ours.
Councillor Oakley?
Thank you. I just want to follow up with just one concern that I had in regards to just the timing. Given that we're only just discussing this now, I'm concerned that we're going to run out of time, and this construction is going to get delayed and bleed into next year, especially when these businesses have dealt most recently with COVID in the past couple of years and already are hurting or still in the process of recovering. I have some concerns that we're not going to make it there. I'm hoping that's not the case, but I just want to express that concern.
If I might, Mr. Chair, I think from a staff perspective, there's been a focus on ensuring we come with definitive information to avoid perpetuating the rumor mill while recognizing that the rumor mill is spinning. So I want to try and suggest that the planning that's going on at a staff level is maybe more advanced, and things are being worked on that are closer to completion, that we just would prefer to have definitive answers before standing in front of committee and before the public. And I think that's why we're preparing for more of a late summer public consultation in order to fit the pieces in that need to be fit in, if I can try and alleviate any concerns.
Any more questions?
Mr. Chair, could I add to that, please? I think that let's be honest about what we've got to do here. There's been a lot of work going on behind the scenes here, and a lot of, there's been reports to council, there's been decisions already made. This is a consultation on how the impacts are going to go here and how we can best alleviate this. We aren't going out to change the design of this. Like, this design is pretty much done, and it's what's going to happen. We're not going out there to negotiate that because it'll be 10 years to get this project done if we do that again. So let's be honest with everybody about that. We're going out to show everybody what we're going to do based on council's decisions and the master plan recently, how we're changing the parking and the like. That's pretty much done. Those drawings, we got a few details to work out, but those, we got to work with some of the businesses on how we're matching the sills and stuff like that. Those are minor details. We're well within this. We do have some things to work out with some of the utilities. I'm concerned about that myself, but we're working very hard on that happening. So we're well along the way on this, but anybody that thinks they're going to come into these meetings and change the design, that's not happening.
Any more questions? Just one comment. Have you reached out to the Paris Fair Board? Because that Grand River Street's going to be down during the fair next year. So they probably need to be well aware of that.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I would say that the development of that business and construction mitigation plan will be coming forward in September, and I think those are certain elements that will be covered off in that.
Thank you. Any more questions, comments? Call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. Looking forward to it. That's why I go around. 8.7, attainable and affordable housing update. Heather Boyd. Motion to put it on the floor, please. Moved by Councillor Bell, seconder. Councillor McAlpine. Go ahead, Heather.
Thank you, through the chair. This report was co-authored with the General Manager of Development Services and myself. Basically, it's an overview of where we are at in terms of our affordable housing projects and where we're going in terms of meeting those task force recommendations and objectives. The long and short, very quickly, we believe that in order to achieve those objectives, we are, and the city is going to have to come up with a different approach to looking at those unit numbers. Part of it being some of the unique cooperative projects that we're working on, and I think the city has one as well. So we just recommend that as that plan comes up for its 10-year review, that it's time that we take a look at those units and how we achieve them, and just make sure we're all on the same understanding so that the works we do are counted towards, and it's not just a matter of having to put forward like another $30 million towards that project.
Questions? Councillor Bell.
Firstly, a comment. I think it's timely to review the plans. I just don't know how we can ever deliver what the current planning indicates. We're at year 5 of that plan. We've got more than half of the work still to do. There's an awful lot of the not-for-profit elements still to be delivered, and the costs have gone up so much, and we haven't got money in the budget. So that's a pretty good starting point. My question is, have we had any conversations with your equivalents in the City Council? And I do recommend that whatever we agree tonight, we copy to the City Council so they're aware of what we've talked about, and can't indicate that they haven't been made aware of it. And final question, what are we assuming in our long-term financial plan?
Through you. So we haven't sent this to city council or city staff. This is for the county committee's consumption first. So one of the recommendations is that we approach the city about opening up that housing stability plan and looking at those numbers. At this point, we don't have those numbers aside from the 15 million that we firmly committed to in our agreement. We don't have anything beyond that in our long-term financial plan. And this is partly to deal with some of that, and recognizing there will be some more, we are going to have to contribute some funds towards that, achieving those units, but we do think that there's alternative ways of doing that. And, province and the federal governments are supporting developers providing some of these affordable houses. We've talked before about the development charges exemptions and all the reasons they're looking at private groups to actually provide these units. So we just think it's time to have a discussion about how we meet those targets before we put any more dollars in a commitment towards that.
So if I may, Mr. Chair, in terms of engaging with the City Council on this, I mean, the City Council is our service manager for this activity. So whatever we agree tonight, we have to be more precise about saying we have to let them know, and we are recommending that we review it, and we want to hear back from them.
Yeah, and if council supports this at the end of the month, it will go as a recommendation, as a letter from us asking City Council to open up discussions on that stability plan and do its review.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Miller.
Yeah, just I'll say, Mr. Chair, kudos to Heather and her staff for bringing this forward, because as you mentioned somewhere in the report there's been immense changes since we started that 10-year housing vision there back in 2019 or 2014. There's a couple lines I like in the report. Was chock full of information, but one was if you look at someone that moves into an affordable unit, they don't really, I'm paraphrasing here, but they don't care who built it, whether it was built by a municipality, the federal government, or a private outfit. They don't care. They just want to get in there and have a place to call their own. So, and then on that note, you reference one of the social service reports there, and this is on page 9 going on to page 10, but they talked about the partnering with non-traditional partnerships. Talked about the city's ventures with JC Brantford, and then the county's venture with Central Ontario Cooperative Housing Federation. It is noted in the report that the cost to provide a subsidy would result in less funds required by the municipality. That's a short little statement, but there's a lot packed in there. And what I think what you say in there, because I read the report at social services, was that if we work with a partner, we can get a lot more built for the same money. That's correct?
Yes, that was my intention, was
okay.
Absolutely we can do that.
And to me, that's, I hope that's, hope's a bad word, but I trust that that's something that we will look further into, right? Partnering and trying to get as much built as we can, stretch the dollars as far as we can. And from everything I've seen, and it's a tough nut to crack, but that was probably holds the most promise. So I thought it was good. I would have stressed that a little more in the report, but other than that, no, I think it's great you're reviewing it.
Councillor House.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Heather, I'm going to echo a little bit of what's already been said, but as our communities grow, the demand for affordable housing obviously intensifies. It gets bigger and bigger. I appreciate the fact that you're bringing this forward and you're shining a spotlight on the fact that we need to dig into it more. More than half of this council wasn't here in 2014. But more recently than this, I remember being involved in the mayor's task force on affordable housing, a joint effort between the county and the city. And as Councillor Miller said, part of that strategy significantly involved partnerships, so that we weren't looking at either ourselves or the city. We're not looking at necessarily being the owners of every affordable housing unit that the municipalities gain. And so I just wanted to ask that as we proceed with this reevaluation, if staff could look again at that task force reporting and recommendations. As Councillor Miller said, this is a tough nut to crack, but like it's getting more expensive to build, but the demand is getting higher, and we don't have the funds allocated like you just said. So this definitely needs a lot of further discussion.
And the task force report, it did recognize a number of units proposed to be municipally built and a number through cooperative partnerships, nonprofit partnerships it talked about. What I'm suggesting is that we need to look further afield in terms of, possibly for-profit partnerships, or how do we work with our development community? Are there options to make it more feasible for private developers to provide affordable housing at a fraction of what we would have to pay to build a unit? I think the city quoted currently like $350,000 to build a unit, which makes it very difficult to make that unit affordable.
Any more questions? Seeing none, all those in favor of the report? Thank you. Heather, you're on deck again. Tax referral. Heather, there is a recommendation. Somebody want to move it? Moved by Councillor Garneau, second by Councillor Pierce.
This report comes, originally it started from a question by Councillor Oakley about if the county offered any kind of program that could help out people who are really feeling a pinch from the tax increases, and the further from council asking us to look specifically at these tax deferral programs. We have done some extensive look at a number of municipalities in our area, outlined what they do and how they do it, and I've put forward a few options. If we just approve the recommendation as it is, there will be no change to the program besides possibly a little cleanup in communications. But if there's anything further we want to take this in a direction of, then it'll require an option choice from council.
Questions? Councillor McAlpine.
So right now, there is a deferral program in place for seniors. That's my understanding. How do we communicate that currently?
It is on our website under our municipal taxes. I think it's a tax relief section on the website. And as I said, we could clean up that messaging and make it a little more clear and a little more easy for people to access. We could possibly do engagement if interested. The deferral program is difficult though, because one, it only applies to the increase in your taxes, and it gets deferred. So eventually you're going to have to pay that when the property transfers or sells. It's mostly for people who just can't make ends meet for a particular year. But even by like the second year, if you applied again, you'd be on that next year's taxes. So you're not getting rid of those new taxes. Like your first year's increase still applies in your second year. So you just push it off a year basically.
Okay, so it's only in regards to the increase.
Yes.
So it wouldn't be the person couldn't say their taxes is $3,000 a year and they couldn't defer it at some point when they retire to the point when they sell it, kind of like a reverse mortgage then. So.
No, it would only be for the increase in a given year.
Councilor Miller.
Well, if I get a seconder, I would like to put forward option 2. That would basically keep the existing program but clean it up a bit.
Second, Mr. Mayor. Go ahead.
Yeah, just what it says in the report aligns with the provincial requirements and what other municipalities are doing. It doesn't change the nature of what we're doing, but it does clean it up. And maybe putting it out there with a refresh of the communications, it might get some takers on that.
Any more talk on the amendment? All those in favor of the amendment? All those in favor of the report to be received as amended? Thank you, Heather. No communications listed. Report from the CAO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be quick here. Just a few updates. Staff are engaged in ongoing PWU and OPSU negotiations currently. A reminder that there is a development charge meeting on Thursday evening. I'm hoping that anybody who's able to can attend. You may have noticed a few things. I've talked to some of you personally about the number of projects that are ongoing through the county, and I think you've got a taste of that tonight. Staff sitting behind you, Adam and Haley in corporate strategy, are working on a project update portal that'll be easily accessible for council members. We're going to continue to look at ways that we can better communicate updates to the plethora of projects that are going on throughout the county. It does become onerous sometimes on both sides to keep updated on all the moving parts and everything that's ongoing. So again, we are looking at developing that portal that can be easily accessible again by council members. We don't have all the details of that yet worked out, but again, that's ongoing. And I'm not going to go into all the details, but I think it's become very apparent both tonight and through the DC report that you received last week, that there's a lot happening in the county, and there's a lot happening in an increasingly complex environment with legislative changes on top of it. So staff are really busy, but again, we're working on ways that we can make that a bit more simplified in terms of our communication, and be able to increase the amount of updates in a digestible way that's not going to be taking up all of our evening meetings, and making sure that everyone around this table is better updated on what's happening. So that is my update, Mr. Chair, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Question for Allison? Getting off scot-free tonight. Thank you, Allison. Oh, sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Is there any way that we can get all that information recorded and sent to us so we can listen to it at another time instead of sitting through another one of those meetings? I thought there was an awful lot of information the other night. It took up a lot of our meeting. And if we could just get that recorded with all the information, then we could just play it when we could. Because it's going to be exactly like the last meeting, and it was still, he was moving at such a clip that it was hard to, I thought it was hard to follow, and if it was on a recording, then I could go back to it. That's all.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm assuming you're talking about the development charges specifically. I don't know the answer. I'm sure we can look at that. For Thursday evening, it's going to be, I think, Heather, predominantly the same presentation. There may be a bit more specific details in terms of some of the numbers because of the audience that's going to be there. But we can certainly look at ways that we can get you that information.
Any more questions? Thank you. Nothing other business listed? We have a go in camera for a verbal update, advice that is subject to solicitor client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. Motion to go in camera. Move by Mayor Bradley. We got it. Seconder, Councilor Belt. We're back in open session. Okay, good. Next meeting, not to September 3rd, 2024. Move for adjournment. We're out.